Okay, very good. Great audience. I'm Carol Cassimir. I'm co-chair of the League of Voters for Westlake or North Olmsted. And my co-chair is sitting in the back, Jean Svigelj, and you will see her later. And welcome, welcome. I'm so happy that we have this nice crowd. And you can all be proud of yourself because you're good Americans. As you know, a lot of people just vote by somebody telling them, or they like the name, or the party, or how they look. And so it's wonderful that you're all here to come and find out what it's all about. And it's just really exciting to see so many people. I wanted to just make a couple of plugs and then we'll get going. Just to remind you that you probably saw the Verify Your Vote out there. Voting, of course, is what the League does. We do a lot of other things, we study and everything, but I think the most important thing that we always do is voting. We want people to vote. And now it's especially important because they've changed some rules on the voting, and sometimes they will take away your name if you've moved and you forgot to put in your new address, or you haven't voted in a while. And so there's other things. So it's a good idea to get up to the Board of Education. They can help you do it out there if you don't know how. And in a few minutes you can find out and make sure that you really are registered, because that's what's important. Okay, let's see. I want just do a few little commercials about the League. There's also a thing out there on the table if anybody wants to join us. We always could use extra help. We've had a lot of people join this year, and it's been wonderful because we spread out the jobs because it's so important. We take positions on issues, but we do not take positions on candidates. Instead, what we have is what we're doing tonight, candidates night, so that you get to meet both candidates. And you can learn a lot from how they feel on the issues and so forth. You can also learn a lot if they're not here, because then you're not finding out, exactly what their positions are. So it's really great to have this many people here. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say. And I would like to introduce Pam Smith, who is from our sister league, Lakewood. Thank you very much, Carol.
Okay, can everyone hear me in the back? Okay, thank you very much for coming. I'll be the moderator for tonight's session. As Carol kindly introduced me, I am a member of the Lakewood chapter of the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland. I've been a member of the League for a long time, but my favorite activity is always candidate forums. And reality TV has nothing. We were doing candidate reality shows long before anyone else got involved with them on television. I'm very glad that you're all here tonight. A few housekeeping things I would say. If you have a phone, like I do, if you can put it on buzz or something so it wouldn't ring and distract people as they're speaking. I want to talk seriously a little bit about the League. The League of Women Voters does take positions on issues, but the other side of what we do is a 501c3 organization, which means that's what we do with candidates and with education. A 501c3 organization like the League can sponsor nonpartisan voter education projects, such as debates, providing certain rules are followed. And the rules get more complicated every year. Have you noticed? I don't think. But one of the things we're particularly cognizant of is we want to be fair to people. And we want, the most important thing is for the people who are voting to have a clear understanding of who they're voting for, how issues important to them are viewed by their candidates. Tonight we have a situation that we have a congressional election, the 16th district going on here in Ohio, and we have a candidate who agreed to come to the forum and an opponent who would not come to the forum. So that put us in a quandary because we want to avoid the appearance of going overboard in supporting a candidate, because that would not be fair. two people, and nonpartisan. But what we did, we asked candidates who could not be here, could they please submit a written statement? And Susan Palmer, who is a candidate in the 16th Congress, did submit a written statement. Her opponent, Anthony Gonzalez, declined to submit one, but he was given the opportunity to do so. So therefore, I'm going to read Susan's statement. Susan, you can wave from the back of the room. You may have seen her coming in, and you can speak to her. I'm sure she's going to stay here till the end. These statements, I'm going to hold to 3 minutes because we've got them for everyone to take one home from the candidates that we are going to read. And then we can move to our live candidates. Isn't that a funny way of talking about things? Susan Palmer sent in this statement. She is a candidate for Ohio's 16th Congressional District. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for the opportunities to submit this statement. As both a candidate and especially as a voter, I deeply value the role the League plays in our society. Particularly for an open seat like this with no incumbent and two first-time candidates, voters deserve a full accounting from anyone seeking to represent themselves in Congress. And I very much look forward to the chance to appear at the League. I looked forward to the chance to appear at the League's candidate forum with my opponent and discuss our priorities and how we each propose to help our constituents and address issues facing communities in this country. Unfortunately, my opponent declined, but I appreciate this chance to tell you why I'm running for Congress. When I grew up in Youngstown, there was a ladder of success in America. If you worked hard and lived right, you and your family could prosper. America's ladder of success is rock solid and built for anyone to climb. My parents climbed that ladder, and so did I. But that ladder isn't there anymore because Washington has stopped working for us. For too long, it's been working for the people already at the top of the ladder, the big money interests who fund campaigns. The results are plain to see, from health care that costs less and costs us more, covers less and costs us more, to skyrocketing higher education costs that pile debt onto the middle class. My parents and upbringing provided me with a foundation on which to build and a ladder to climb as high as I could. But that ladder doesn't exist for today's children, and the foundation is being steadily eroded. The result is a smaller and smaller middle class, which has to work harder and harder just to keep up, and for which the prospect of a more prosperous future seems further and further away. I have lived in this district in Westlake for more than 20 years, raised my family here, and built a business here. As a healthcare professional and as a mother, I can't watch any longer as our residents and communities are harmed by extremists and special interests in Washington. America is only successful when we strive to expand the middle class. The middle class drives our economy and well-being. When we concentrate our resources on the wealthy, our economy and people suffer. That's why my focus in Congress will be fixing our broken healthcare system by strengthening the Affordable Care Act, lowering healthcare costs, and protecting Americans with pre-existing conditions, reducing crippling college debt, and expanding secondary education opportunities, reducing gun violence to make our children and communities safer, investing in our nation's infrastructure as an effective way to stimulate our economy and at the same time meet critical domestic demands and national security needs. I'm running for Congress because I think we need people willing to stand up for all of us and put America's ladder of success back in place. This will be hard work. It's not an entry-level job. It will take real effort facing hard truths and making practical choices. It will take someone who's been tested in the ways that count and earned her way, someone who's been here and will stay. The remaining 2 paragraphs you will find if you pick up this at the end, at the conclusion of the meeting. And that's the statement for people who have just arrived of Susan Moran Palmer, who is running as a candidate in Ohio's 16th district. We regret that we do not have a statement from Anthony Gonzalez. The next thing that happened in Cuyahoga County, we have a high-profile race going with the county executive. And the county executive, Armin Budish, could not be here, nor could the man running against him. So similarly, I have 2 statements from those 2 candidates. First, I will read from Armin Budish's statement, stopping again at 3 minutes. I would like to begin by thanking Marcia Goldberg, Janice Patterson, the leadership of the League, and all of you in attendance this evening. The League is a critical organization in Ohio, and I wholeheartedly support your mission to provide greater access and information to voters. I would also like to thank and recognize League members for their activism that made redistricting and reform possible. And in specific, members of the West Shore region were extraordinary. While the state of Ohio's history extends over 200 years, our county government has existed for less than 8. The challenge of the charter was to expand economic development, strengthen the county's voice as a regional leader, and to increase mechanisms for public accountability. The criminal justice system, safety net services, and county public works, all traditional roles of the prior county, were largely left aside. Each of these responsibilities is important, and for each of these I've sought to improve Cuyahoga County. With these goals, we have balanced 2 challenging budgets in the face of dramatic state cuts. Highlights include pre-kindergarten, more than doubling the number of children in pre-kindergarten to nearly 4,500 by raising over $13 million from private sector donations and investing $10 million in budget savings from other county departments. Economic development. Since taking office, my administration has shifted county economic development resources from downtown to throughout Cuyahoga County. We have shifted to revolving loans and projects that leverage outside funds. Over 400 men, women, and minority-owned businesses and more than 10,000 jobs overall have been created. Our county unemployment rate is almost half of what it was 8 years ago. Our young people are choosing to live here again, with our age 25 to 34 population over 170,000, the highest it's been in decades. We are now 7th in the country for young workers with advanced degrees, a remarkable contrast to our previous standing of lagging the nation in almost every education and youth indicator. Safety net services. We have not only sustained Metro Health, but have partnered to rebuild its aging campus. In joint efforts with Cleveland and the state of Ohio, we raised millions to fight infant mortality. This year we are seeing our first dividends with a nearly 20% reduction in preventable deaths. This year we also doubled the number of opioid treatment beds and are fighting to do more next year. Public accountability. While it's only been 8 years since the new government has taken effect, we have already seen improvement. The media has done its job to report possible wrongdoing, reports that were launched by internal investigations conducted by our own county agencies. With 7,000 employees and billions of dollars processed by the county, what is most important is that we quickly catch wrongdoing, eliminate systematic issues, and keep moving forward. We cannot rest in our diligence. If any wrongdoing is discovered, we have and will take every step necessary to punish and eliminate the problems discovered. That's Armin Budish's statement. A man named Peter J. Corrigan will appear on the ballot. He did not run. Armin Budish is a Democrat, and man in the Democratic Party. Man is running as a Democrat. There was no one running in the Republican primary to oppose Armin Budish, but a man named Peter Corrigan filed the papers as a write-in candidate. And the state of Ohio says that if a write-in candidate garners 50 votes or more, they advance to the November ballot. And so that is what has happened this November. Mr. Corrigan could not be here, but he sent his own statement. My name is Peter J. Corrigan, and I'm a candidate for the position of Cuyahoga County Executive. I regret that the opportunity to address you in person was revoked because he couldn't be here in person because Mr. Budish wasn't here in person. With all due respect to your rules, I gladly accepted the League's invite weeks ago, but cannot force my opponent to accept nor speak to his reasons. In 2009, Cuyahoga County passed the Cuyahoga County Charter. It was meant to be the beginning of the end of a major corrupt system that had its latest origins from 1998 until its culmination with Jimmy DeMora being found guilty on 33 counts of bribery and racketeering. Fast forward to 2018, and we have a brand new round of emerging corruption. With the present county administration building having been raided by the FBI twice and the current county executive under both FBI investigation and being served 14 subpoenas from the county prosecutor. All this came from a man who pledged to put checks in place to help root out early seeds of corruption. Deja vu all over again. Continuing. The rest of the story includes major property valuation increases with corresponding tax hikes, a broken child services department that is overseeing a 4-year-old child brutally beaten to death while being overlooked by this system, and career politicians paying consultants and favored attorneys hundreds of dollars an hour, while the poorest city in the state, East Cleveland, isn't included in future economic rehabilitation plans. Finally, while statistics show that 67% of the adults in Cleveland are functionally illiterate, county officials are talking about enacting a job-killing, heavily political human rights commission that's unaccountable to voters, which ignores all the federal and state-defined protected classes for civil rights infractions, and which sets the table for unbridled lawsuits and legal actions that will flood our courts with nonsense. Clearly, the priorities of our county government are out of whack. We need to sweep out the entrenched political class and replace it with new leadership that's interested in bringing jobs and business growth back to our county. We need to turn around to reduce costs and improve performance. I have had experience in doing that. I'm a lifelong Clevelander. I went to St. Ignatius and John Carroll. I worked as a nuclear physicist and engineer. I earned my MBA from Case Western Reserve and am an alumnus of the Harvard Business School. My domestic and international experience involves turning around large organizations and managing as many as 2,800 employees on 5 continents. By attacking corruption, developing long-term strategic plans, using zero-based budgeting to help control costs, addressing property tax overreach, and implementing a Cuyahoga First program for hiring, contracting, and purchasing, I believe I can continue the 2009 plan to reestablish Cuyahoga County as a significant economic engine. That is a statement from Peter J. Corrigan, and you can get it in a hard copy at the back of the room. I would like to ask the candidates for House of Representatives in Ohio, District 16, Mr. Dave Greenspan and Mr. Cassimir Svigelj. Thank you very much, gentlemen. So this is the live portion of our show, of our presentation. I want to call your attention to the candidate, the information that is in your bulletin here. You will note on page 2 information sources and websites, which I invite you to peruse on your own computer. And in the program, it states what we will be doing here as we have the candidates for Ohio House. Each of these candidates will share this microphone and have 2 minutes each. After that, we will have questions from you in the audience. If you have not been to a lead candidate forum in the past, let me explain how we work our questions. There are ushers along the sides who have cards and pencils for you to write your questions on. You can direct a question to just one of the candidates, but as a moderator, I usually allow the other candidate to step in and answer as well, because that seems in the interest of fairness. The candidates will first make a presentation of 2 minutes, and then the question period will have a maximum of 1 minute. But frequently it goes faster than that, and we can cover a lot of questions. The reason we have written questions is that allows our screeners, nonpartisan group at the back of the room, to look at those questions and kick out ones that are essentially the same, so that I don't have to tell a person we've already heard that question. And that will allow us to hear the most possible questions that we can answer. They will also take out questions that are about topics that aren't germane to what we're doing and that sort of thing. After we have our question time, then each candidate, again, flipping the order that they started with, will have a closing statement of 2 minutes. Jean, have I covered everything? I believe that I have, and we will start with 2 minutes, and we will start with Mr. Greenspan. 2 minutes. These are our timers here in front. They'll hold up a card at 1 minute, and then 30 seconds, and then stop, and you'll be able to finish your sentence.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Is
It should be on.
this on? Can you hear me?
I don't think it's on.
Let's see what the button is here. We've had these on and off all day here. It is on.
Great, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank the League for hosting this event tonight, and I want to thank the League also for their continued support as they've been a watchdog for reform here in Cuyahoga County ever since the new form of government, actually before the new form of government took place. As many of you know, I served on the inaugural county council for 6 years before being elected to the State House. And the League was very instrumental in us crafting our Inspector General ordinance as well as our ethics ordinance. And Linda Mayer, I always tease that her husband's mad at me because one Saturday night she was on the phone with me so long that she burned dinner and her husband was pretty upset with me because of that. I also want to congratulate and thank Cassimir for entering the race. It takes tremendous courage to enter the political arena. And I also want to congratulate he and his wife on their recent marriage. I know they got married about 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So 2 months ago, so I want to congratulate him for that. Real brief introduction about myself. I'm married. My wife and I live here in Westlake. We've lived here for over 11 years. We have 3 children, a 25-year-old daughter who lives in Manhattan and works in the fashion industry. My older son who leaves Sunday for the Air Force. He's a second lieutenant, and he'll be a drone pilot. And my youngest son is just trying to figure out at 7 years old what to be for Halloween. One of the things that I focused on when I've run for office every time is experience and understanding the fact that when you represent a constituency, especially one as large as not only 120,000 people in the district, but of 11.6 million people, how important it is to have relevant experience and understand the challenges and opportunities that face our district and our state. I've served both at the city and the county level and have served for 2 years as a state representative. And my focus has been very simple. It's the same focus I've had at every level of government: local government, transparency, and economic development. And as we continue to discuss tonight through the format, I'll be able to highlight some of the achievements that we've been able to realize as your state representative and some of the benefits that have been beholden upon our district as a result of us being able to realize some of those opportunities down in Columbus.
Thank you. Mr. Svigelj?
Very, very good, thank you. I would first like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who came out this evening. Democracy only works when everybody participates in it. And thank you to the League for hosting this important event, and to my opponent, Representative Greenspan, for agreeing to come out. As we've seen with other races, that's not always the case, so thank you for coming out today. I'm running to represent all of us here in District 16 because I can no longer stand by and watch Columbus politicians put political ideology over the people of this state. If elected, I promise to put people over politics. That means making sure our schools are providing a quality education, implementing common sense policies in regards to firearms, and ensuring that every resident has access to affordable health care. I'm a lifelong product of Northeast Ohio. I was raised by a single mother who got pregnant while she was still in high school. I have fond memories of growing up on the shores of Ashtabula, Ohio, right across the street from Lake Erie. I was fortunate enough to have supportive grandparents. My grandfather had a strong union job down at the docks, and we eventually moved to North Olmsted, where I attended Maple Elementary School, while my mom worked full-time, getting her teaching degree from Cleveland State. She eventually saved up to buy a house in Berea. That's where I graduated from. And by that time, I was the eldest of 5 boys. And that taught me leadership and sacrifice. That you have to look out for one another, and that we accomplish more together than we do on our own. I stayed close to home, graduated from Cleveland State with a political science degree. My wife and I have been in Rocky River for over 3 years now, and I would like to spend the rest of our lives here on the west shore of Cuyahoga County. And I hope to spend a few of those years fighting for all of us as your future state representative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, I need you to hand in those questions that they picked up. Now, I was trying to make a few notes as the candidates spoke about what you might want to ask. There's a lot of people here, so we should have a lot of questions. What do you want to know about transparency? What do you want to know about education funding in Columbus? What do you want to ask these candidates about local government funds? What do you want to ask these candidates about all the other things that government does that affect our lives positively or negatively? So let me ask this question. Both candidates would get 1 minute if you need 1 minute, but maybe you won't. So starting with Mr. Svigelj, what in your previous job experience will help residents of the House District 16 when it comes to the state budget?
Well, I'm a political science grad, and before I got into this race full-time, I was working 3 jobs, 2 of them service industry, as well as helping out on a mayoral campaign in 2017. Budgetary-wise, I've studied over especially the 2016 budget, and I've noticed a lot of cuts to things like Meals on Wheels and senior transportation, which affects particularly my hometown of Rocky River. And I'd really like to make sure that our local government funding is restored, so that way communities have access to solve the problems that they have, rather than leaving it up to decision makers in Columbus, most of who have never been to each of the other 98 districts, other than to campaign for somebody else. So.
Thank you. Mr. Greenspan, what's your previous job experience and how does that help residents of the House District 16?
Well, thank you. I graduated with a degree in accounting from Troy University, and since then I've worked my way up from a staff accountant to be chief financial officer of 2 public companies. I also, as an elected capacity, served as chair of the Cuyahoga County Finance Committee, which, if you look at it from a partisan perspective, I'm not aware of any other elected body where a member of the minority party is appointed to be chair of a finance committee, whether it be in county government or in the state house. So I chaired that for 2 years. We balanced the budget. We did not increase taxes. And we also provided $10 million worth of funding for early childhood education, UPK, as it's more commonly known. I serve on the Finance Committee in the State House. I started that position in January of this year, and I also have earned the respect and trust of my colleagues to be appointed as chair of the Finance Subcommittee for Transportation. And so I believe that through my professional experience and through my political experience, that I clearly have the skill sets and experiences to continue to serve the residents of the 16th District and understanding through firsthand experience of managing budgets.
Thank you, Mr. Greenspan. Here's a question on education, and it's a 2-part question that'll be hard to answer in 1 minute, but we'll see what we can do. How will you oversee the for-profit charter schools and charter schools in general, linking that to how do you support public education? Oh, Mr. Greenspan, can you go first?
Sure. Well, let's be clear, as far as charter schools are concerned, I'm challenged by the concept of for-profit charter schools. Understand this is my first term in the General Assembly. Obviously, they existed before I had an opportunity to serve in the legislature. I do believe that both charter schools and traditional schools should be graded and treated separately. Treated identically. Unfortunately, there is somewhat of a dual standard. We're working, since I've been in Columbus, to rein in some of the charter inequities that's gone on, whether it be from the ECOT scandal and from being able to look at how we can provide additional financial resources to our schools. I can tell you here in the West Shore, one of the challenges that we were faced with, and as it relates to public school education, had to do with the TPP tax issue. I can tell you that 4 of our 5 districts in public school education, the budget that I voted on, did not see a reduction in funding. Westlake, unfortunately, did see a reduction in funding, but it was due to the TPP issue, which was started back in the Taft administration.
Thank you. I'm going to perhaps ask a question about education again later. Okay. Mr. Svigelj, how will you oversee for-profit charter schools and try to link that to public education if you can?
Definitely. First and foremost, I believe that if there's a school operating within a school district, it should be held accountable to that city's school board. The state report cards just came out about a week ago, and we've seen the inequities with 3 of our cities in the district with an average home value of 60,000 have the A rating, and as we go down to the 20,000 property value, it becomes an F rating. It's directly related to wealth. It's 20 years of unconstitutional practice, and we need a drastic overhaul. And the state legislature over the last 20 years hasn't been held accountable, and until we come up with a real reform rather than throwing money at a problem every year when somebody brings it up, we're not going to have real change and real accountability.
Thank you. The next question is about education funding, and we'll start with you, sir. What are your plans to address education funding? And there's 3 bullets on this card. Fully funded kindergarten, charters or for-profit schools, and what about funding for post-secondary education, for college or for trade schools?
Yeah, it's a big question in 1 minute, but I'll take it from reverse. I'd like to see a reinvestment into our higher education system. When it comes to funding, I'd like to see a centralized funding model with localized control so that school boards and superintendents and districts have the power to spend, and that the state controls how it's distributed by a per pupil basis. Really simplify the process, and it holds the accountability to local elections, and people can go see their local school board members and superintendents. They can't make a call down to a state house for a representative that represents a district 300 miles away. So,
thank you. Mr. Greenspan,
Right.
what are your plans to address education funding?
Sure. As far as higher education, let me touch on that one first. In this last budget, we're obviously concerned with the increased cost of tuition, and we put a freeze in the budget in House Bill 49 that no public institution in Ohio shall raise their tuition no more than 3%. So we're trying to address the issue as far as containing the cost of tuition in higher education. As far as capital is concerned, we in the capital budget, we put nearly $1 billion between public education and higher education into capital investments into our public universities. So we are working on that issue and how to address that is controlling the cost, which we've addressed, and putting more money into capital improvements. Real quick on universal pre-K, as I mentioned in my introduction, I talked about in Cuyahoga County we were able to put $10 million a year into universal pre-K. There was an issue put into the state budget this last cycle where 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in the first year of the budget were eligible for funding for early childhood education funding. However, in the second year of the budget, for some reason it was eliminated. I was able to put into the budget a provision that allows now for 50,000 3-year-olds to be educated in Ohio, and had that amendment not been introduced and not happened, those 50,000 3-year-olds would not be educated in this current budget.
Thank you. Starting with Mr. Greenspan, you have a wide-ranging district here. Many of the people here are represented by you. And this question asks, what's your top 3 priorities for your district and for the state of Ohio?
Great question, and once again, these are very lengthy questions. So obviously working on local government funding, I know it's a challenge since I've been there, we've been able to at least ensure that our 5 communities, our 5 cities did not see a penny of reduced funding in local government funding this budget. It was actually one of my priorities when I went down there, and we're able to successfully live up to that commitment. Now, one of the main things that I've been working on is increasing local government funding. I have a House bill which takes half the state surplus and puts it into a fund and automatically invests that into roads in every community. If that bill had been passed in this current year surplus, we would have seen $1/3 billion, $330 million directly invested in our local communities. And a lot of the legislation, I've introduced 17 bills. A large portion of those bills have to do with focusing on providing greater opportunities, whether they be investment opportunities or capital opportunities, for our local communities to ensure that they are as strong and as solid as they can be.
Thank you. Mr. Svigelj, what are your top 3 priorities?
I'd say starting out, number 1 is protecting our environment. Our number 1 resource in this state is Lake Erie. It's a $16 billion industry when we look at tourism, fishing, the islands, the shores, and we don't address the problem in the Clean Lake Plan of the phosphorus runoff coming into the western basin that is now spread all the way to the east side of Lake Erie. Secondly, I'd have to say the opioid epidemic. As we've just seen, it's a 20% increase again from last year, despite claims from Governor Kasich that it's really been tailed off. It's another straight year increase, and I don't think talking about a problem for 8 years is going to solve anything. We need to release local government funding at minimal back to 2005 levels so that local communities can address their problem with their own power and knowledge of their local areas. And 3, I'd like to implement a smart grid infrastructure plan. We're very walkable communities, bike to school weeks, self-driving cars are operating here now and within the next 10
Okay,
years.
thank
we
you.
have to protect our.
Perhaps that will come up in a future question.
What's up, Seth?
Mr. Svigelj, what proposals do you have to reduce gun violence?
For me, it's pretty common sense reforms. Right now, our schools already allow for people to be armed in their faculty through the Buckeye Firearms Program. I hope that doesn't come to our districts because I don't think more guns is going to solve a gun problem the same way I don't think adding more cars to the road is going to solve our traffic problems. And this is a point I have to disagree with my opponent's position on HB 79 and arming paramedics. I don't think that's the right approach. We need universal background checks, red flag laws, and allow cities like Cleveland to put in handgun policies rather than forcing them to adhere to state policies down in Columbus based on a political philosophy.
Thank you. Mr. Greenspan, what proposals do you have to reduce gun violence?
Great, well, thank you, I appreciate the opportunity to address this issue. I do want to touch on a comment that my opponent made regarding a bill and regarding protecting the protection towards first responders. I have a bill right now, House Bill 38, which is the Public Safety Military Protection Act, which unfortunately is being put in place because we're seeing, among other things, first responders being attacked by doing the job that they perform. Most recently, we saw an issue down in Youngstown where 3 firemen were fired upon as they were returning from an incident simply because they were firemen and they were protecting the citizenry. What that bill that he's specifically talking about, number 1, is permissive. It's up to the local jurisdiction. But we have paramedics inside the city of Cleveland who wear bulletproof vests. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, because as they perform their jobs, they're being attacked, they're being shot at. So what that bill actually did was provide for paramedic firefighters to actually accompany SWAT units on high-risk scenes. So should there be an incident, first responders are immediately on the spot. So I just want to clarify exactly what that bill did and what the intent of it was.
Thank you. I know this is a topic hard to address in 1 minute, so I have split that question up into another one. Question asking, starting with Mr. Greenspan, what is your stand on, what is your position on stand your ground laws?
Thank you. So I'll get right to the heart of this issue, is House Bill 228, which is really a self-defense bill. What that bill basically does is if you're lawfully able to carry a firearm, you are able to protect yourself should you feel as if your life is in danger, and 2 provisions take place. Number 1, you're not the aggressor in the action. Number 2, you first have a duty to retreat. If you feel as if you cannot retreat, then you have the ability to protect yourself. That bill also put into effect certain provisions that makes the straw man, I don't know if you know the straw man provision of purchasing a firearm on behalf of somebody else and then that person commits a crime. In that bill, it strengthens those provisions and make anybody found guilty of a straw man purchase or a straw man transaction guilty of a felony 3. So there is some strengthening of gun law, of gun provisions in the bill, but it also is a self-defense bill that allows individuals to protect themselves should they feel as if their life is in danger, they are not the aggressor, and they feel as if they have no ability to retreat.
Thank you. Mr. Svigelj, what is your position on stand your ground laws?
I am firmly against stand your ground. I believe it disproportionately affects minorities. I don't want us to turn into Florida, as we've seen earlier this year, and then Trayvon Martin, one of the most famous cases about it. In regards to the specific bill my opponent mentioned, John Kasich just came out with his executive order because 20% of these so-called straw mans haven't been getting reported. So we can talk about how the laws aren't being affected or that there are laws in place, but the fact has been that they can say that laws exist, but they're not being enforced. And it's going to continue to be a domino effect. And I come from a biracial family, and I don't want to see one of my younger brothers being targeted because he's a different colored skin, and somebody feels threatened by him walking towards them. So,
Thank you. This is a question about the distance between Northern Ohio and Columbus. Because what we read in Northern Ohio about what goes on in Columbus and the State House can sometimes be a little dismaying. So, starting with Mr. Svigelj, how do you plan to put an end to corruption in Columbus?
I could handle this in 60 seconds. The culture of corruption, it runs rampant down there. Every other week we hear about another scandal, payday lending, ECOT, sexual harassment, culture of misogyny, and that's truly why I got into this race. I know I would like to implement, as soon as I get down there, a weekly podcast, talk show, allow people to submit questions on what's going on in the State House, really create a direct line between me and the citizens of the district. Because I know local news is being strained right now. There's not the funding that there used to be. The Capitol Report does a great job getting out the main stories every weekday, but it's a lot of work for just 2 people there. And I'd really like to open myself up and be the voice of the district and allow access to anybody who has any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Greenspan, how do you plan to put an end to corruption in Columbus?
Well, thank you, and I appreciate that opportunity to address this question. As we know, here in Cuyahoga County, when we put this new government together back in 2011, I ran on a platform of addressing the corruption issue by launching the first ethics ordinance in the county, and actually it's the most comprehensive in the state. Followed that up immediately by an Inspector General ordinance, which I hope you would support as it's on the ballot this November, to put that in the charter. You know, it's very interesting to deal with corruption because you're dealing with people and individuals, and obviously what we have is our rules and processes that are in place currently to address these issues to prevent them from happening. But individuals are individuals, and we try our best to live by the standards that are put forth not only by law but by your own personal beliefs. And it's very difficult to address those issues and try to have people curtail or pertain to a certain type of belief if they don't already have that in them. So what I would do is look back to the electorate and say, listen, it's your job, as you're doing now, to vet candidates. You need to look for candidates that have strong ethical backgrounds and practices, and those that have beliefs and history and experience to deal with these issues.
Thank you. Starting with Mr. Greenspan, you know, we seem very polarized in our country. There's Democrats and there's Republicans, but we all should recall that there are still thousands of independent constituents that have chosen to belong to neither party. Can you tell us how you work with those folks?
Great question. So our district right now, based on last election, is 30% Republican, 20% Democrat, and 50% independent. You have never heard from me in any forum in the last 8 years I've represented you referred anything as a good Republican, conservative, liberal, progressive, or Democrat. Good idea or bad idea. People are people. You call my office, whether it's in the county or the state, we address your issue. I actually get offended when somebody responds to me and says, well, I voted for you, or I'm a Republican, because you know what? It doesn't matter to me. I'm going to help you the best I can, regardless of your political affiliation, because that's what you elected me to do. We have a strong constituent communication base, to which I'm very proud. In the 8 years I've represented this district, we've had close to 60 public forums, whether it be town halls, roundtables, Donuts with Dave. Since I've been in the legislature, some of you attended those events. Our office responds to every email, every letter, every phone call in like fashion, and oftentimes I will call versus respond in an email to get that direct communication so I can understand how to best serve you, and which I believe I have done effectively for the last 8 years.
Thank you. Mr. Svigelj, how will you appeal to independent constituents who do not affiliate with either major party?
Yeah, about 2 weeks ago I met with the Cuyahoga County Libertarian Party to discuss our mutual issues and views in regards to simplifying the tax code to make sure that there's equity across who pays in rather than squeezing out middle class and small businesses, protecting women's right to choose and making sure that the government doesn't have a strong arm in deciding what's best for a woman's body. So it's first going and finding people who have common ground with you rather than walking into a situation with your already preconceived beliefs. And it was very positive. I got their full support, and so I'm happy to work across any party lines to make sure I address issues down at the state. I know a few Republicans have been running on a similar idea of putting accountability back to local school boards. It's something I agree with. I believe the power should be back into local municipalities, not at the State House.
Thank you. Starting with you, Mr. Svigelj. Multifamily housing, let's change gears to housing. Multifamily housing developers often face municipal challenges when proposing the new construction of affordable housing, whether it be for seniors or for families. What will you do to promote the need for affordable housing options within the district? In particular, how will you encourage municipalities to collaborate with affordable housing developers?
I'm a strong advocate for affordable housing. I personally live in an affordable condo district as my wife and I try and work to pay off our student debt before we can invest in buying a small family home. It's tough to face a vocal minority who is against these kind of proposals, but I think it goes back to the local government funding and making sure that the cities have the resources to invest in those kind of development projects.
Thank you. Mr. Greenspan, do you have any thoughts on multifamily housing?
Well, thank you. I do believe that all of our communities and communities in general should have a mix of housing options, but I also believe that it's a local government decision to determine how best to effectuate that philosophy. As a representative, and I work with Republican and Democrat mayors in the district, but I also talk with mayors and county commissioners and township trustees all across the state. And it's my belief that the best government is the government that's closest to the people, and I would allow that decision to be made locally. But I do believe, if approached with the subject, I have not been in my years, 2 years in the legislature, been approached by this. But if I was, I would clearly try to advocate on their behalf. But once again, I just believe this is a local decision.
Thank you. Starting with Mr. Greenspan, this is a question on health care. Currently, our country has many citizens who lack access to health care services, either because they cannot afford insurance, or they're underinsured, or they face social or cultural barriers. What steps would you take to correct this imbalance?
Well, obviously, we've seen, at the federal level, the Affordable Care Act is obviously in place, and it's providing opportunities for many Americans to receive health care throughout the state. We have through the governor's initiative back 8 years ago, to expand Medicaid expansion here in Ohio clearly has provided benefit to nearly 700,000 Ohioans. One of the things I can say, and that I've proven not only in my term on county council, but the State House, is to be a strong proponent for Metro Health and the mission that they serve to work with not only payer-sourced patients, but those who are in a fortunate situation that can't afford health care. And we actually just had an amendment that was put into a bill that provides Metro Health specifically with the ability to expand into counties to which they are adjacent to expand access to quality health care. And also that would have a positive impact on Cuyahoga County in the sense that it's able to by expanding its base, expand its opportunity to be more solvent, which the hospital system has been.
Thank you. Mr. Svigelj, currently our country has many citizens who lack access to health services. What steps would you take to correct this imbalance?
Yeah, I fully supported Governor Kasich's Medicaid expansion a few years ago. 653,000 is the number of uninsured I had for what it covered. But that's only about half of the uninsured that was in the state of Ohio. And I think we have a real opportunity to revisit the public option and allow people to buy into that sort of program for those who don't currently have insurance, especially younger, healthier people. I know for a year I went without health insurance, and I was lucky enough to be at that point where they cut off the mandate for it, so I didn't have to pay any penalty. And it was the year after I got off my mother's insurance program. But if we open up and have an Ohio-sponsored public option, I know there's been a lot of talk of it at the federal level, but a lot of states, like Hawaii, does it with their under-age great teens, and Massachusetts also has a strong program. I think we could bring that to the state of Ohio and help cover the other 650,000 that are uninsured.
Thank you. Starting with you, Mr. Svigelj. What do you think about laws to protect Lake Erie?
Yeah, I briefly touched on it earlier about the Clean Lake 2020 project. I really like that there's going to be funding going into it, but I also think that it's trying to stop a running faucet. It's just going to keep coming through as long as we don't address the problem in the Maumee River, in the Sandusky Bay, in the Western Basin. I wouldn't be opposed to offering tax incentives or subsidies to farmers out west to help remit the cost of investing in environmentally friendly manures, so that way we don't continue to have toxic runoff going in and polluting Sandusky Bay. I don't want, we've seen the green tide, but the red tide down in Florida is a direct result of the same thing happening in saltwater. And I don't want to see any more dead fish rolling up to Lake Erie, to the top of Lake Erie, when 84% of the world's freshwater fish comes out of this lake. This is an industry we need to protect and preserve, and it's the industry of the future.
Thank you. Mr. Greenspan, what have you seen in Columbus on the future of Lake Erie?
Yeah, thank you. Well, obviously, a few years ago, the legislature passed Senate Bill 1, which was a Lake Erie Protection Act, and obviously we need to give legislation like that an opportunity to actually work. And we're seeing that the impacts of Senate Bill 1 are actually having a positive impact on what we're seeing on Lake Erie. But all too often, we have legislators that come in and try to put their thumbprint on something and unwind a number of pieces of legislation, but this one in particular, before we have an opportunity to see it really reach its fruition. We put more money in the capital budget and the operating budget this year to help with the Lake Erie environment, to ensure that we have a more prosperous lake. And both Senators Brown and Portman were able to bring back $300 million just recently to help with Lake Erie and with preserving that waterway. So I would encourage us to be patient with Senate Bill 1 as it's working, and look forward to the opportunities that we've been able to enact in this past General Assembly, current General Assembly, as it relates to the lake.
Thank you. Here's a question. In fact, I had written a little note to myself to ask this question if nobody did. Good audience here. And this is about the rainy day fund that we read about in Columbus that seems to have been growing by leaps and bounds, while many people see ways that that money could be spent now, or a portion of that money. So the rainy day funds, according to this writer, the rainy day funds were largely taken from local government budgets. So how could some of that money be returned to local government budgets? Mr. Greenspan?
Thank you. The rainy day fund now is about $2.7 billion, which is just under 8%. It's about 13 days worth of operating capital for the state. I don't believe in any way that the state is going to see an immediate reduction to zero of income coming in. When we were in Cuyahoga County, I passed an ordinance to preserve our rainy day fund at 25% for the general fund and 10% for Health and Human Service Fund. I do agree. The governor and I have a disagreement on this issue. I mentioned House Bill 415, where we take half of the surplus and put it into roads and infrastructure into our local communities. I'm trying to bring back some of those dollars because I do believe it is important that we invest back in our local communities, because our local communities clearly are the fabric of our state. Without strong, vibrant local communities, I'm not sure where we would be. So I am working with this one specific bill. I am facing some resistance. I'm going to be with the governor tomorrow, and I'm going to talk to him again about the value of restoring some of this funding specifically under this plan to help our local communities.
Mr. Svigelj?
Yeah, I'm glad Representative Greenspan brought up the total amount, the $2.9 billion, I believe he said. Most experts that I've read when it comes to local government funding agree that a state of Ohio's size really only needs about $1.5 billion in its rainy day fund. And I believe that money should be restored, going to restore back to 2005 levels, so that communities can invest in the projects that they see most worthy, rather than having a checklist or somebody fight down in Columbus to try and get somebody to release a little bit of that piggy bank for them. And as well, it also stripped away from school funding as well, and I think that's an important part that we need to talk about. I believe in 2016, the Democrat who ran for this seat pointed out that it was about 15 million has been taken from this district's school funding, and I think that's been real detrimental to the state. And we're lucky enough to live in a district that is able to afford these levies while other school districts have really slidden.
Thank you. Starting again with you, we have a question on education. Do you agree or disagree with the state policy of takeover of failing schools?
I do not agree with that policy because it puts in a corporate head into a community. A lot of the times that person has not been to that community, doesn't know the character of that community. I understand that the schools are failing, and that goes back to my earlier point about the stripping and funding. I know I said 15 million from this district, but in my hometown of Berea, we lost close to 100 million. And it goes back to that issue of funding. You can't keep stripping away, asking people to do more with less resources. So unless we're adequately funding, then I don't think we should be saying that you failed these kids and we're going to bring in an outsider.
Thank you. Mr. Greenspan, what's your opinion on state takeovers of failing schools?
Yeah, thank you. I actually agree with the policy. Having been someone who's been engaged in turnaround entities for most of the last 20 years of my professional career, you come in to turn an organization around if the practices and the policies that are in place aren't working. This policy goes into place if the district has had a failing report card for a number of years, and it's restored back to the local community after the district has an opportunity to be turned around by these outside entities. So I support the policy, and once again, based on the fact that my own professional experience, you go in to turn something around with a fresh perspective and ideas, so you can change the culture.
Thank you. Here's a question, starting with Mr. Greenspan. We often see that a bill might be passed that we all like, but then we don't see anything happening after the bill gets passed. So have you had experience with having a bill passed and then not having the bill been enforced? And how could voters that see that happening make a difference?
Yeah, great, thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, I've introduced 17 bills. I have 3 that have been signed into law, and I have 8 that are pending in the Senate. I was hoping 2 were going to come out today, but they did not. I actually have a bill, a suspended driver's license reinstatement bill with Representative Barnes, once again a bipartisan bill, of which I'm proud to say that 3 of the bills that I'm working on right now are not only bipartisanly supported, but are my joint sponsor is of the opposite party, because a good idea is a good idea. I've also agreed to work on a number of bipartisan bills in this General Assembly and if re-elected the next. But to this point, this bill that I'm talking about, we're trying to advocate and have it move along. It goes into effect in January. If you see a bill, that's what I'm here for. If you see a bill that's not moving, or you see its action isn't moving, reach out to our office. That's what we're here to do, is to ensure that these bills move forward. Often they're moving forward and they're being implemented, and a lot of folks aren't aware of the exact implementation phases or steps that the bill requires. So I would first call the office. We'll see what we can do to research it and find out what's going on. And then it's my job as a legislator to inquire as to why the administration is not acting on the bill.
Thank you. Mr. Svigelj, would you have any comments on bills that get passed and then don't get enforced?
Yeah, I do. Because of the inaction that we've seen down in Columbus and the lack of accountability, it's forced citizens to try and change the Constitution for things that should be handled down in Columbus. Earlier this year in the primary, we had to fight to make sure that congressional gerrymandering came to an end. Now we've got issue 1 on the ballot to reform our drug policies, because over the last 10 years, the State House has not addressed the key issues in our state. And when we continue to call representatives on these key issues, human rights, education, then we have to go and do direct democracy in our own hands. And I was happy to join the League of Women Voters in petitioning to get the original issue 1 back before the primary onto the ballot and really force the hand of the General Assembly. Because when we're vocal and they take notice, and we can force change through direct democracy.
Thank you. I'd like to thank these candidates for their thoughtful comments on the many varied questions, and thank those in the audience that wrote the questions.
The best I've had since elementary school. I would again like to thank the League of Women Voters for their continued efforts to advance participation in our democracy, and to everyone who engaged in this forum this evening, and my opponent as well for making it up here. I know a lot of the times you got to be down in Columbus, so thanks for coming up here. But I believe it's time for leaders in Columbus to change their focus. We need policies that protect our students, natural resources, workforce, and ensure our economic future through investments in renewable energy, job training, and access to universal pre-K for all residents of Ohio. I've got the new vision and integrity to change the culture of corruption in Columbus, and I hope you'll entrust me with that task this November. Inequity and lack of job opportunities have plagued this state as a result of failed leadership at the State House that's been ruled by one party for 24 of the last 28 years. I hope that you've seen the differences between my opponent and I, and that the same unsustainable path for Ohio isn't going to benefit us anymore. And I hope that you'll join me in bringing a fresh perspective down to the State House. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be on your ballot this November, and I hope tonight has convinced you of my authenticity and desire for a better Ohio for all of us. Thank you very much again.
Mr. Greenspan, looking forward to your 2 minutes closing statement.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You know, when I started, I talked about experience, and I talked about having relevant experience to understand and address the issues that are facing not only our district but our state. Having that experience started for me and understanding what's required of being a municipal and starting at the municipal level. I was involved in founding a city of 100,000 people back in Georgia. Started that from the ground up. When I came here to Cuyahoga County, I was encouraged to run for county government, to start to be engaged in that level of government. And now at the State House, I've been involved and engaged in working to bring meaningful reform and change and opportunities here for our district. We were able and successful this year in the capital budget, as an example, talking about bringing opportunities back to the district. I had a roundtable on November 30th. We met with stakeholders December 15th. We submitted our proposals by December 31st. And 90 days later, we've had 9 qualifying projects that applied, and all 9 were funded to the tune of just under $900,000 for our district. Talk about experience, understanding what it takes, what our communities need, and how to bring it back to the district, I think is really important. Talk about the economy in Ohio. We've talked about the rainy day fund. The state in the last 8 years, and more so in the last few years, has brought and created over 500,000 new private sector jobs. I can tell you, in serving on the Council of State Government's Executive Committee, and I was at a convention in June, Ohio has more manufacturing jobs started in the last few years than any other of the 11 Midwest states. That's a direct result of policies that are positively impacting our economy here in Ohio. We actually, for the first time in a long time, have more jobs available in Ohio than we have people seeking jobs. Once again, our economy is robust. I've had a manufacturer in Westlake tell me last week, when national GDP went above 3%, he couldn't hire enough people to fill the orders. And in talking with manufacturers, talking with employers, what they're saying is the issue isn't innovation, the issue isn't product, the issue is finding qualified employees to fill these jobs. And that's one of the challenges we have in Ohio.
Thank you.
One of the challenges that I'm working on. And I hope to earn your vote for re-election. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Introduce Janice Patterson.
My name is Janice Patterson. I'm a member of the Westlake Untitled Chapter. Thank goodness for cell phones and silencing, because I got a text message from Nan Baker, and she is still sitting in a pro and con hearing at county council meeting about the anti-discrimination clauses that are in, part of them are in the charter amendments that are going to be on your November ballot. And so you have not received the required mailing of charter amendments yet, but you will be getting those in the mail. All registered voters will. The wording of the amendments is on the Board of Elections website now. And I will plug that the League of Women Voters is inviting you back on Saturday afternoon, the 6th of October, to this very room, when members of the Charter Review Committee will be here to help explain these charter amendments. So it sounds like issues are a little hot on that. I'm not totally familiar with what it is, but I suspect you'll be getting word from various places very soon. So put that on your calendar if you possibly can. We do have limited copies of the candidates who were not here, their statements. But if we run out before we do, please leave us your email address on a card, or we have a list back on the information table that you could give us how to get those statements to you. And there is, as you leave today, the opportunity to pick up literature from our candidates, and with a little extra time, I'm going to guess they're going to linger around and meet. Jean. That's the danger of a little house. Pretty soon they'll be wireless.
Just like to thank everyone for coming, especially our two candidates, and also Pam Smith, our league moderator. On page 2 of your program, you have a list of information sources that could be helpful as you are preparing to vote or filling out your absentee ballot. And one of those is our league website, vote411.org. And as you leave the room, some of our volunteers will be passing out bookmarks with a reminder of that website. So again, thank you so much for coming and participating in the democratic process.